Welcome to ScienceLogic Symposium 2021. This is James Tsuruda from ScienceLogic Support. Topic of discussion today here is using iservicecontrol in Powerflow, or also known as PFCTL, which stands for Powerflow Control. This is a brief summary of what we'll be discussing today. 5 points that hopefully you'll be more familiar with by the end of the discussion regarding iservicecontrol, and a few other points that iservicecontrol allows you to do: healthcheck, autoheal, autocluster, and some interesting tidbits about those. So what is iservicecontrol, also known as PFCTL? Iservicecontrol is a command line utility for automating manual processes and manual checks for a given Powerflow instance. It's also known as PFCTL and has been part of Powerflow since version 2.0.0. You might be wondering what the name change is all about. As of Powerflow 2.1.x, the command has changed to PFCTL to match the Powerflow rebranding from the original name, Integration Service. So what does PFCTL do? One of the main uses is the health check. It's useful for checking the integrity of a Powerflow 3-node cluster, for example. There are two types of actions that you can run. You can run a cluster action or a node action. The cluster action option will allow you to run commands across 3-node clusters, across all 3 nodes. Node action is meant to be run on individual nodes. How do I run it? Full documentation can be found here at this link. We'll also be providing these links up on the website for you to download and peruse. One thing to note for this utility, if you're not familiar with it or have not been from the beginning of the Powerflow product, prior to 2.1.0, it was still invoked with the original iservicecontrol syntax, and the -- host clauses are at the end of the command. So in the earlier documentation, you would have seen the format looking something like this, where you have iservicecontrol, cluster action, action, health check, and then the host parameters at the end. Something to note for 2.1.0 and beyond, and something that did cause a bit of confusion for users who are used to the old method, the -- host clauses are now right after the original invocation of the PFCTL. So it's the first parameter following the command. So it would look something like this: PFCTL -- host, all 3 hosts, and then your cluster action command with your health check subcommand. Running health check. Here's a little sample screen output of what it might look like. This is a node action against a single node. Notice here that we've got a missing index over here. Also have a little note here asking you to, or encouraging customers to upload the output of the health check to support tickets to give us a rough idea of what might be going on in your system prior to us looking at it. So this is a node that is running Powerflow 2.2.0. I'm going to run the health check with the cluster action across 3 nodes. Note 2 of these nodes are configured correctly, and the 3rd node is actually not part of this cluster at all, but we will include it in part of this health check just to demonstrate what sort of things it can be checking for. Notice we've got failure for the first node where we're using too much memory. So the suggestion would be to adjust the memory limits for that node, or perhaps add physical memory to it. And we have a similar problem on node 3 here. We also notice that we're missing an index on .182. That can be repaired with the autoheal. And we've noticed that there's some stale containers on the third node. And so what else can it do? So we've got two other features that we'd like to discuss. One is autoheal, and another is autocluster. These are common functions that are used by our deployment engineers and also people in the field looking to fix problems that might be happening in real time. Let's look at the autoheal subcommand first. The autoheal command can fix some typical problems that might occur in a Powerflow 3-node cluster by invoking as a cluster action. You can also fix some items as a node action as well against individual nodes within a 3-node cluster. So how do I run it? We've got the full documentation right here at this link, which will also be provided at the end of the presentation. And here's another example of how you might run the autoheal command. This is against a single node. We'll go through an example on a multi-node cluster or 3-node cluster later on. So if you notice here, we do have a check here for verifying node indexes. So the indexes that we're missing shows that they have failed over here, and the utility has gone ahead and recreated these indexes for you. So that has saved you some time from having to do that on your own, which could take a few steps of looking at documentation. We ran the health check against the cluster and saw a few things on some of the nodes. We did see that we were missing an index on the second node. Let's go ahead and fix it using a node action. But normally, you could just rerun the command, the cluster action with autoheal to run against all 3 nodes. In this case, when we were running the autoheal, when we were running the health check in the first place, we were running against the third node that actually had nothing to do with this cluster. So for the purposes of this example, I will avoid running the cluster action for autoheal. We will run a node action autoheal against the second node just to fix this index. So here we go. So as you can see, we've got verified node indexes there, and it's telling us that the indexes will be recreated. It's in the process of doing that. And you can actually watch along in the Couchbase UI for that if you're curious as to what's going on behind from this action. It looks like it detected some other faults that we may have missed in the original health check. But there you have it. We were able to fix the problem without having to do any additional lookup of procedures for rebuilding this index. So next command we'd like to look at is the autocluster. The autocluster command automatically deploys 3-node HA Powerflow clusters, eliminating manual configuration. This is only useful for a standard 3-node HA cluster. And we do have customers that have more complicated setups with drain nodes and worker nodes, manager nodes. This is only for a 3-node HA cluster with strictly manager nodes. So manual configuration is still required for those other types of scenarios. One caveat is that if you do run this, you should only be running it on initial deployment. There is no reason to run this command at any other time. Unlike the Coro install script for SL1 clusters, the autoclusters script for Powerflow will actually go in and reinitialize all of your data, guaranteeing that everything is working, but you do not want to lose your data. So please only run this on deployment. If you're trying to fix something in your system using the autocluster command, you're probably not using the right command. You're probably doing something that you're not intending to do. At the very least, you should take a backup of your data before running autocluster against a live cluster. Recent versions actually display a warning message and prompt the user to confirm the action before initializing the cluster. So you should be safe in your versions of the utility. So how do I run the autocluster command? Of course, we have documentation here. Please refer to it at your leisure. What else can it do? We do have some additional utility subcommands here. One is for generating the configuration for your cluster or your 3-node cluster for setting up an HA proxy load balancer. Not everybody uses HA proxy, of course. It's freely available for anybody to download, but this will provide a template for your configuration for any other load balancer and include some key settings that you would need to extrapolate for whatever load balancer you choose to use for your cluster. The other one that's used here is open firewall ports. This is usually already set up or invoked implicitly when you run the autocluster command on deployment. If there's any reason you have to add a new node back into a cluster where one node dies, you could probably use this command to open the port so that that node can talk to other nodes in the cluster. And again, we have our documentation links over here, which will be provided to you at the end of the presentation. Did you know that the iservicecontrol or Powerflow control utility can be installed anywhere Python 3 and pip3 is available, so long as the dependencies are satisfied? So you would normally install it with the pip3 command, pip3 install, and the name of the file, which has a .whl extension. So this means if you're able to install it on a remote node, this means that you can actually specify remote Powerflow hosts as targets. The Powerflow control command does not have to be living on the actual cluster node that you are trying to get information from. So where do I get the latest version? You can go to our support site, down to product downloads, and to the Powerflow section. Starting with Powerflow release 2.2, it is included in the release file section. And as mentioned before, you can install it at the command line with the pip3 install command as root. Now remember, we've got some do's and don'ts. Do run the health check on your cluster if you suspect a problem and include the output in your support cases. But do not run the autocluster command on a running cluster, as this will result in data loss. That brings us to the end of our presentation. Here's some things that we hope we have learned by the end of this. We've learned what the PFCTL command is. It's the new name for the iservicecontrol command, which lets us do a number of things, including the health check. And we'd love to have the health check output in our tickets in support so that we can help you better. Another thing to note is that the health check parameter order has changed between Powerflow versions 2.0 and 2.1 and on. So make sure to refer to the documentation to ensure that we are running the command correctly. We've learned that the autoheal command can fix some simple issues. And one caveat is to only run the autocluster on initial install. Do not run it at any other time on a running cluster. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining our presentation today. My name is James Tsuruta from ScienceLogic Support.